Kendall Qualls is the president of TakeCharge. TakeCharge strives to unite Americans, regardless of background, toward a shared history and common set of beliefs. Before founding TakeCharge, Kendall spent 27 years in the healthcare industry, leading commercial teams, rising to the position of Global VP of Marketing. He spent the last 15 years of his career specializing in reviving stagnant or declining business units. Prior to his professional career, Kendall served in the U.S. Army, serving stateside as well as in South Korea on the DMZ. Kendall earned 3 graduate degrees, but most important to him is his family. He and his wife, Sheila, have been married for 35 years, and they have 5 children together. He serves on the board for Lundstrom's Performing Arts Center in North Minneapolis, as well as Hope Farm School, a school for at-risk boys from Minneapolis. Please join me in welcoming Kendall Qualls.
And so, you know what? We're living in some crazy times, and it reminds me of a novel by British author Charles Dickens. In The Tale of Two Cities, he wrote, "These are the best of times, these are the worst of times. This is the age of wisdom and the age of foolishness." You know, in some respects, I feel like we're living through that today. We're bombarded with messages that the country is overflowing with white supremacy, systemic racism, and even now, the National Foundation on Family Relations has coined the 2-parent family as an extension of white privilege. It would be a surprise to many people that we're actually living in the least racist period in our country's history. But if you listen exclusively to news media, the entertainment industry, and what I like to call the academic industrial complex, you would never know the real truth. That this is the least racist period in our country's history, in one of the least racist countries in the world. So, having lived through the Jim Crow South, my parents and grandparents would have loved to have grown up in the America that I grew up in. Tonight's theme of Envisioning a Post-Racial America may seem kind of a bold and provocative statement, especially in today's environment, but it shouldn't be a surprise. That's because the vast majority of Americans have been operating in that mode for quite a long time. You know, they've been treating people with respect, dignity, compassion, regardless of race. Yeah, they have the audacity to treat people by the character and not the color of their skin. You know, you can pass a law for me to walk into the front door of this hotel, reserve a room, all that. But you can't pass a law that forces people to open their hearts and homes for someone that doesn't look like them. But you know, that's exactly what America has been doing for many, many years. They've been opening their hearts and homes. So how do we explain the differences on the realities on the ground with what we hear in the media? Well, I'm going to use my family as a classic example of the best of times and the worst of times, and the disparity between reality and rhetoric. So my adult children had a normal life growing up in a 2-parent family. They had their challenges, but they also had stability, unconditional love, and clear boundaries. And I'll use one of my children as an example of this. My son Joshua, he graduated from St. Olaf College in 2019. He moved out a week later, started his job in Austin, Texas 2 weeks after that, and they got married 2 weeks after that. All of this in 35 days. The newlyweds have been married now for 2 years, and they now have an 8-week-old little puppy. My wife Sheila and I, we're very proud of Josh and the rest of our 4 children. But now here's the contrast. Among their 15 cousins on my side of the family, so my nieces and nephews, my children are the only ones to grow up with both a mother and a father in the home. Half their cousins have never finished high school. None have gone on to college. Half my nephews have been incarcerated. My nieces are mothers of children having never been married. So how do we explain these differences? Was it systemic racism built into American society, or was it something else? Well, here you have two tales from the same family, same skin color, yet the disparities are quite broad. You know, on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was 5 years old. And at that time, nearly 80% of black children were born in two-parent families. In my lifetime, we have seen the black community transformed from 80% two-parent families to 80% fatherless homes without one national initiative to reverse the trend. If the American black family was a spotted owl or gray wolf, it would be on the endangered species list. There would be a national campaign that said, "Save the black family." There'd be galas, commercials, bumper stickers, and the bumper sticker would say, "Save the black family," right next to another one that said, "Free Tibet." My friends, what has happened in the black community is nothing short of a cultural genocide. And it's the cause of 90% of the problems that we face in our communities, not the mystical systemic racism. This is not the dream that Martin Luther King had in mind, and it's been a nightmare for children born during this time. We have been used as political pawns for 50 years, and it ends tonight. So this is why I've taken on this crusade to begin a transformation back to cultural roots in the black community of faith, family, and education, and reverse a trend that has devastated generations of families, including helpless children born into situations not of their own making. As many of you know, I started my life in Harlem. When my father returned from the Vietnam War in 1968, my parents divorced. The day we arrived in Harlem, we were mugged in broad daylight, 1 block away from reaching our grandparents' apartment. I was 6 years old at the time. I know what it's like to live in a community where the police is unfunded. The criminals rule the streets. Coming home after school each day, it was always a challenge. I never knew what to expect from either gang fights or shootings. I would return home to our public housing project. The elevator was broke nearly half the time, so I had to walk up the flights of stairs, 10 flights, to apartment 10A. The problem wasn't the walk, it was always the stairwell was dark because drug addicts would knock out the light bulbs and shoot up heroin in the stairwell. So when I finally reached the 10th floor, knocked on the door, after a while my mom would unlock all the locks, open up the door. It was like being in a dark cave and the sun would just overwhelm my body. It's just like a stream of sunlight would come in. I walked in and met with a big hug and the aroma of pine sol. So my mother was a woman from the South, and she believed that cleanliness was close to godliness. We had the cleanest place in the most filthiest town you could ever imagine. She had high standards for us. She used to say, you know, just because you live in a place like this doesn't mean that you have to live like you're from a place like this. Unfortunately, my mother couldn't handle all 5 of us by herself. My older siblings were getting absorbed into the street culture of Harlem. The burden was too much for her. As a result, my father arrived 4 years later, took me and my younger brother to live with him in Oklahoma. He was still a drill sergeant in the Army, and because he was paying alimony and child support, all he could afford was a trailer in a trailer park. And that was my start in life. You know, I've been called ghetto kid, trailer trash, and a lot worse in this country. But here's one thing I did learn over the course of my life. In our country, where you start in life is not where you have to stay in life. I wanted something different, didn't know how, didn't know anyone that had it different, but I knew it started with an education. That's why education is so important, because it's the great equalizer. So I worked full-time to pay for college. I was in an ROTC program. I was commissioned as a field artillery officer when I graduated. And as Alfreda mentioned, I served for 5 years stateside as well in South Korea, right on the DMZ between North and South Korea. I transitioned after 5 years to pursue a career in the corporate world and civilian world. My first job was in sales with Johnson & Johnson. A few years later, I got promoted in sales management. Later, I was identified as a high potential leader within the corporation, and they promoted me to the home office in New Jersey. Now, by that time, I had earned 2 graduate degrees. I was moved up from marketing manager to group product director in 4 years. In that time, we launched an innovative new anti-infective in the hospital market, and we grew that brand from 0 to $1 billion in just under 5 years. And I was responsible for the strategy and the commercial execution of that brand with support from 3,000 sales force, a 10-person marketing team, and I had responsibility for a $94 million budget. And at that time, I was 36 years old. And I was reflecting at that time that where I worked, my office, was literally 1 hour away, less than an hour away, from 30 years previously where I was being held up with my mom in New York City with my siblings, less than an hour away. I share this story not to boast about my career. I share this story because it's one of the reasons why I got involved in the public arena. You know, the promise of America still works. Trust me, I tell people all this time, I'm no one exceptional. I live in an exceptional country, and I serve an exceptional God. A story like mine can happen to, only in America, but it's happened to millions of people in this country. The other reason I got involved in the public arena, because I heard things that I didn't hear before, especially from elected officials, that the country is systemically racist. I know what systemic racism is. My parents and grandparents lived through systemic racism. I did not. Over the course of my life, I received help from people, personally and professionally, that didn't look like me. I received help from people that were black and white, rich, poor, male and female, from all over the country. They helped out of the goodness of their hearts. How do I know that? Because I had nothing to give them. They helped out of the goodness of their hearts. Americans routinely help people that are trying to better their lot in life, and they don't put a racial filter on it. My story is just like one of many in this country. Unfortunately, my siblings made different decisions in their lives. 4 of my siblings got involved in drugs early on in their life. 3 of them were incarcerated. But far worse, their children were left without fathers in their homes. Their stories are like many families in the black community, ravaged by fatherless homes, lack of father involvement, lack of personal responsibility, lack of faith, and most importantly, lack of hope. I mourn for what's happened in their lives often. So my children will live a life that's wide disparity from their own cousins, not because of the color of their skin. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear, on this, that we do have racist people in this country that do bad things to people. But the country's not systemically racist. And I'll put it another way. If you look for racism in this country, you'll find it. But if you look for opportunity, you'll find it 100 times over. So we're faced with the question, how do we resolve the tale of the 2 cities? The 80% fatherless homes, the chronically low graduation rates of high school students. Ironically, the power to change ultimately lies in the hands of black Americans. With that said, I would like to direct these following comments to the black Americans in this conference hall, throughout the state of Minnesota, and the rest of our country. For far too long, we've watched as our black communities have been destroyed from within. As a community, we are worse off now than we were before the civil rights movement. We have it within our power to move forward and to begin a transition of healing and growth that is long, long overdue. And we do not need government help, government funds to do it. My friends, we're missing out on opportunities in this country to which we are fully entitled as American citizens that are clearly visible to nearly everyone except us, native-born black Americans. Many of us are blinded by the tears of anger, mistrust, and misunderstanding. that leads to decisions that are not in our own best interest. Today, Black American citizens that have legally immigrated from the Caribbean islands and African countries like Nigeria, they earn significantly more than native-born Black Americans. They achieve higher levels of education, and they are living the American dream that civil rights leaders desired for us. Many of these new citizens came to the country with intact families, which helped them with achievement and integration. But another reason they've had success is they haven't been indoctrinated by years of anti-white, anti-American, and anti-capitalist hatred. Now, more than ever, it's imperative that we reconcile with the sins of our nation, reestablish two-parent families, rebuild our culture, and join other Americans around the table of prosperity as fellow citizens of this great country. The question is, how do we get started? Well, it starts with tapping into the strengths of our cultural roots of the Black culture, which is linked to our Christian faith. Forgiveness is the cornerstone of Christianity. Just as God extends forgiveness to us in Christ, we are called to forgive others. As we take steps to forgive our country for sins of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and many other forms of bigotry that followed, the heavy burden of bitterness, anger, resentment would be lifted from our shoulders. Our eyes will be open to clearly see the path forward, allowing us to focus on what's best for our future and the future of our children. And I want to be clear, to forgive is an act of strength, not weakness. And we at TakeCharge are here to help. We've partnered with for-profit and nonprofit organizations in the Twin Cities to be a conduit of hope, to begin the healing and strengthening process in our communities. My friends, this is our prodigal moment. It's time to come home. So now, returning back to the full audience, thank you for allowing that private conversation. You know, we have all of us in this room and throughout, we have a shared history that unites us, that is not taught in depth to appreciate the exceptional country we have. Our shared history transcends political parties. It transcends ethnicity, religion, and class. It is a shared humanity that really binds us like they're intertwined roots and branches of trees in a dense forest. So let me give you an example of that. When our nation was at war with itself, the issue of slavery was right in the center of it all. In the first 2 years of the Civil War, the tide was rolling in favor of the Southern Army. Massive losses of human life were piling up on both sides, and the country was desperate for the war to end. At the Battle of Gettysburg, if the Confederates prevailed, they would have likely captured the capital, and the war would have been likely over, because there were no Union troops between Gettysburg and Washington, D.C. So Colonel Colville, commander of the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Regiment, was charged to stop the advancing troops of the Confederate Army that was coming their way with 1,800 men. They needed time for the Union Army to regroup so they can go back on the offensive. And Colonel Colville was ordered with his 280 men, 4 times smaller than the opposing forces, to stop those forces, stop those troops. The Minnesota Regiment charged right in, and they did just that. They stopped that Confederate advance. But it was at a huge cost. Colville was wounded 3 times. The regiment lost 80% of its troops in that regiment. It was the largest loss of life of any unit in the Civil War at that time. And it's the largest loss of life from a percentage standpoint of any unit in the history of the United States Army to this very day. Their sacrifice helped win the day and ultimately the Battle of Gettysburg. Ladies and gentlemen, standing for you tonight is a grateful and humble man, a direct descendant of American black slaves, the same slaves that those Minnesota men died fighting to free from bondage. I'm mindful of the sacrifices made by Americans, black and white, over the course of history. My prayers are that I may lead a life so honorable and worthy that it puts smiles upon their faces in heaven. In this hour of divisiveness in our country, it is time that we remind ourselves that we are Americans first. We cannot continue forth as a healthy nation thinking we are living in two separate Americas and pitting groups of people against each other. It is unsustainable and is un-American. We must come together in a renewed hope in our future by returning to trusted foundational values that can see us through a post-racial America. Foundational values and behaviors that has weathered the test of time, which include personal responsibility, strong work ethic, pride in one's nation, faith, two-parent families, and a first-rate education that allows anyone, and I do mean anyone, to achieve their dreams. Even someone once called ghetto kid and trailer trash. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my story, and like millions of others, it's an American story. Thank you, God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.